You have no business being here. Do you understand me? None. The woman who said it was wearing a cream silk blouse and pearls that probably cost more than a month's rent in most Canadian cities. She was smiling when she said it, which was somehow worse than if she had shouted. The woman she said it to was standing near the entrance to the lakeshore room of the Fairmont Royal York, holding a small clutch purse, wearing a modest navy dress she had bought off a clearance rack at Winners 3 weeks earlier. She had taken the GO train from Scarborough that morning. She had left at 6:15 so she wouldn't be late. Her name was Miriam. She was the groom's mother. 2 days before the wedding, her son Elliot had called to ask if she needed a ride. "I'm fine," Miriam had told him. "I'll figure it out." "Mom, it's downtown. The parking is impossible." "Elliot, I have been navigating downtown Toronto since before you were born. I will be fine." He had laughed, that easy, rolling laugh that used to fill their little apartment on Kingston Road, and told her the rehearsal dinner started at 7. She had written it in the small paper calendar she kept on the fridge door, next to a photo of Elliot at his grade 8 graduation, missing his 2 front teeth and grinning like he had just been handed the world. She had not been invited to the rehearsal dinner. She found this out when she arrived at 7 o'clock in a dress she had pressed twice, and earrings she had borrowed from her neighbor Claudette, and the hostess at the restaurant told her politely that the private event was for immediate family and the wedding party only. Miriam had stood there for a moment, on King Street West, the June air warm around her, and then she had walked to the Tim Hortons 2 blocks north and sat with a large tea until it was time to take the train home. She had not mentioned it to Elliot. She didn't want to make a fuss. This was a thing Miriam had learned very early in life, that a certain kind of woman, a black woman from a certain background, without money, without connections, without the right last name, survived by not making a fuss. You absorbed, you adjusted, you showed up the next day, you kept going. She had been keeping going for 51 years. Miriam Adebawale had grown up in Regent Park before it was redeveloped. Not the cleaned up, gentrified Regent Park of the present. The old one. The one that smelled like mildew in the stairwells, and where the radiators only worked half the time, and where her mother worked double shifts at a care home in Etobicoke, just to keep them from sliding backward. Miriam had done her homework at a kitchen table that wobbled unless you wedged a folded piece of cardboard under one leg. She had worn her cousin's hand-me-down winter coat for 3 years in a row. She had also, from the age of 9, been very good with computers. There had been a donated terminal at the community center, an old IBM thing that most of the kids ignored in favor of the ping-pong table. Miriam had sat at it for hours. She learned to type. She learned the rudimentary logic of early programming, taught by a volunteer named Mr. Singh, who showed up every Thursday afternoon and seemed genuinely baffled that more children weren't interested. Miriam was interested. Miriam was fascinated. By the time she was 16, she was fixing computers for people in the neighborhood for $10 a visit. By 18, she had a scholarship to Ryerson. By 24, she had her first job at a small tech startup in the Junction. By 28, she had left to start her own company with $1,100 in savings and a folding table she set up in the second bedroom of her apartment. The company was called Adawire Solutions. It did back-end infrastructure work for mid-sized businesses, the kind of work that nobody saw and everybody needed. Miriam was good at it. She was better than good. She was the kind of person who understood, at a cellular level, how systems fit together, what broke them, what made them hold. She hired her first employee at 30. By 35, she had 12 people in an office in Liberty Village. By 40, she had offices in Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver, and a client list that included 3 of the country's 5 largest banks. By the time Elliot called from his university residence to tell her he had met someone wonderful, Miriam Adebawale was worth approximately $430 million. She had told no one except her lawyer, her accountant, and her oldest friend, a woman named Gloria, who still lived in Scarborough, and who had reacted to the news by saying, "Girl, you need to stop taking the GO train." Miriam had not stopped taking the GO train. She had her reasons. She had watched what money did to people. She had watched it change their faces, their posture, the way they moved through rooms. She had watched people she respected become people she no longer recognized. She had decided, very deliberately, that she would not let that happen to her. She would live carefully. She would keep the life she understood. And, when Elliot found someone to love, she wanted to know, she needed to know, that they could love the real version of her. The Scarborough version. The woman with the clearance rack dress and the GO train schedule. She had waited. Elliot had been dating Courtney Frazier for 2 years before Miriam met her. The first meeting had been at a brunch in Yorkville. Courtney's suggestion. Elliot had explained apologetically because Courtney liked the place and knew the owner. Miriam had arrived in slacks and a good blouse and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. Courtney had arrived in head-to-toe Lululemon, talked at length about her family's property in Muskoka, and asked Miriam what she did. Consulting, Miriam had said. Which was not untrue. Oh, interesting, Courtney had replied, in a tone that suggested she did not find it interesting at all. Miriam had watched her son during that brunch. She had watched how he tilted toward Courtney when she spoke, how he deflected when Courtney grew bored, how he laughed too quickly at things that weren't quite funny. She had seen the particular way a person bends themselves to accommodate someone else, and she had recognized it. And she had felt a cold, quiet worry begin to settle somewhere behind her sternum. She had said nothing. She had gone home on the train and called Gloria and said, "I don't know." Gloria had said, "What do you mean? You don't know?" "I mean," Miriam had said slowly, "that I'm not sure she sees him." "What does that mean?" "I mean, I'm not sure she sees the person he actually is. I think she sees the version of him she wants." There had been a pause on the line. "Miriam," Gloria had said gently, "every mother thinks that about the woman her son chooses." "I know," Miriam had said. "I know." She had tried to be fair. She had tried to be open. She had attended the engagement party at the Frazier family's home in Rosedale, a house with a chandelier in the foyer that Miriam had privately appraised at somewhere around $40,000. And she had shaken hands and smiled and said yes when Mrs. Frazier asked if the canapés were lovely. They were lovely. Everything was lovely. She had felt like furniture. On the morning of the wedding, Miriam arrived at the Fairmont at 10 o'clock, as Elliot had asked. She was directed to the bridal suite and then redirected by a young woman with a headset and a clipboard to a small sitting room off the main corridor that appeared to have been arranged as an afterthought. There was a tray of fruit and a carafe of water on the table. The chairs were stiff. She waited there for 2 hours. No one came to check on her. At noon, a different young woman with the same style of clipboard appeared and told her that the ceremony photographs would begin at 2 and that family members were welcome to observe from behind the designated viewing line. Miriam thanked her. She ate a piece of melon. She drank some water. She thought about the company's Q3 projections, which she had been reviewing that morning before she got dressed. She thought about a meeting she had on Monday with a client in Calgary. She thought about the folded piece of cardboard under the kitchen table in Regent Park, how her mother used to check it every morning to make sure it hadn't shifted in the night. She thought, "Keep going." The wedding ceremony was beautiful, in the way that very expensive things are beautiful. Everything calibrated, nothing accidental. Every flower and candle placed by professionals who were paid to make beauty look effortless. Elliot stood at the altar in a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly and looked exactly like his father had looked. On the day Miriam married him, 27 years ago, in a rented hall in Scarborough with 63 guests and a DJ who played 2 hours of soca and one inexplicable 30-minute set of country music. She had loved that wedding. She had cried at this one too, but quietly in the way she did most things. Elliot cried as well, which surprised her and undid something inside her chest that she quickly reassembled. Courtney was beautiful. This was undeniable. She walked down the aisle in a dress that moved like water and looked at Elliot with an expression that Miriam studied carefully, trying to read it honestly, trying to be fair, she thought. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've been wrong the whole time. She held on to that. The reception began at 5. Miriam found her seat, table 11, near the back, between an elderly great-uncle of Courtney's who had already fallen asleep and a young woman who appeared to be a colleague of Elliot's, and who spent most of the cocktail hour looking at her phone. Miriam introduced herself as Elliot's mother. The young woman looked up from her phone, said, "Oh wow," and looked back at her phone. Table 11 was 14 tables from the head table. Miriam counted. She had been seated between an elderly great-uncle of the bride's family and a junior work colleague of her son's at table 11. At the back of the lakeshore room, at the reception for her only child's wedding. She folded her hands in her lap and watched the room. It was during the cocktail hour, near the entrance to the room, that Courtney Fraser, Ada Boyle, now, Miriam supposed, found her. Courtney was with two of her bridesmaids and her mother, who was wearing the kind of smile that meant she had recently seen something she found offensive. They were moving through the room the way a group of women move when they own it. Unhurried, certain, shoulders back. Courtney stopped when she reached Miriam. "Miriam," she said pleasantly. "I'm so glad you could make it." "Thank you for having me," Miriam said. And then Mrs. Fraser looked at Miriam's dress. Just a flick of the eyes, up and down, so fast that if you hadn't spent 51 years learning to read that particular look, you might have missed it, and said, to Courtney, not to Miriam, "Is she the woman Elliot said works in computers?" "She does some consulting," Courtney said. Mrs. Fraser's smile didn't change. How lovely. Then Courtney turned to Miriam, and her voice was still perfectly pleasant, still perfectly modulated, and she said, very quietly, "I hope you understand that tonight is about optics. The Mancinis are here, and the Holbrooks are here, and I'd really prefer if—" She paused. "If things stay simple." Miriam looked at her. "I'm sorry?" "The seating," Courtney said, "and the photos. Elliot's family photos will be taken separately. It's just easier." The smile did not reach Courtney's eyes. Miriam said nothing. The bridesmaids looked at each other. One of them, the taller one with auburn hair, glanced away. And then Mrs. Fraser said it, quietly, pleasantly, with her pearls and her silk blouse and her Rosedale smile. "You have no business being here. Do you understand me?" "None." Elliot was 30 feet away. He was talking to a man Miriam recognized as one of his university friends, laughing, a glass of sparkling water in one hand. He had looked up when his wife and mother-in-law crossed the room, and he had seen them stop near the entrance, and he had not come over. He was still not coming over. Miriam stood very still. This was the moment she had been circling for 2 years, she realized. This was the thing she had felt coming, the thing she couldn't name, the cold worry that had been sitting behind her sternum since that Yorkville brunch. This was it. Right here. And her son was 30 feet away, and he was not moving. She thought, keep going. She thought, no, she thought, not this time. She turned to Mrs. Fraser and said, in the voice she used in boardrooms, level, clear, without heat or hurry, "I'm Elliot's mother. I came to see my son get married. I'm going to stay for dinner, and I'm going to dance if there's dancing, and then I'm going to take the train home. You are welcome to be uncomfortable about that." And she walked away. She sat back down at table 11. She ate the bread that was placed in front of her. She watched the room. Elliot did not come to her, not when the champagne was poured, not when the toasts were made. 4 of them, including one from Courtney's father that lasted 11 minutes and mentioned Elliot's name twice, and one from a university friend that was genuinely funny and made Miriam laugh despite herself. Not when dinner was served. She was halfway through her salmon when she heard the sound. It began at the entrance to the lakeshore room. A low sound, like the room changing pressure, like the air shifting. People near the doors turned. Then the people behind them turned. The ripple moved through the room the way a sound moves through still water. 3 men in dark suits had entered. Behind them, 2 more. And behind them, moving with the particular unhurriedness of people who have never needed to prove anything to anyone, came a woman in a gray blazer, whom Miriam recognized as the head of her legal team, and a man in a charcoal suit, whom she recognized as her CFO. And behind them both, A third person who was speaking quietly into a phone. People were murmuring. Someone at the table nearest the door said something Miriam couldn't hear. Then she saw Courtney's father stand up from the head table. Courtney had gone pale. The gray blazer woman, whose name was Catherine Osi Mensah, and who had worked for Miriam for 11 years, walked directly to table 11. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Catherine said. She said it to the room, not just to Miriam, because Catherine understood optics better than anyone Miriam had ever met. "We have a situation that requires your attention. I'm at my son's wedding," Miriam said. "I know. I'm sorry. It's the Halifax infrastructure deal. The servers went down 20 minutes ago. TD, Scotiabank, and RBC are all affected. The federal minister's office is on the line." The room was very quiet. Miriam looked at her salmon. She looked at the table. She looked at Elliot, who had stood up from the head table and was staring at her. She said, "Give me 5 minutes." She put her napkin on the table. She pushed back her chair. She stood up, and as she did, she heard Mrs. Fraser at the table 2 rows over say, in a voice that was no longer quite as certain as it had been, "What on earth?" Catherine had already opened her laptop. Miriam spent 23 minutes on the phone with the minister's office, walking them through the containment protocol, authorizing her team to bring in the emergency response engineers, and coordinating with the 3 banks' internal IT heads. She did it standing near the window of a small anteroom off the lakeshore room, in her clearance rack navy dress, with her clutch purse sitting on the windowsill. When she came back into the main room, it had changed. It was not that the room had changed physically. The flowers were the same. The lights were the same. The band was still playing something low and unobtrusive. But the air had changed, the way a room changes when everyone in it has been told something that rearranges their understanding of where they are standing. Courtney's father was talking to Catherine in the corner. He had the look of a man doing rapid recalculation. Mrs. Fraser was sitting very straight in her chair and not looking at anyone. 2 of the Mancinis, whoever they were, whoever Courtney had wanted to impress, had approached Catherine and were shaking her hand. And Elliot was standing in the middle of the room, and he was looking at his mother, and his face had the expression of a man who has just understood that he has been looking at a photograph his whole life, thinking it was a window. He crossed the room. He said, "Mom." "Elliot," she said. "Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know any of that." "I know," she said. "I know you didn't. I should have." He stopped. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes briefly, the way he used to do as a small boy when he was trying not to cry. "I should have come over there. When Courtney's mom, I saw it. I saw her, and I didn't. I just stood there." Miriam looked at her son. She had loved him since before he was born. She had carried him on the bus, in a second-hand carrier, taken him to the library every Saturday, helped him with his physics homework at that wobbling kitchen table, gone without new winter boots 2 years running so he could have the ones he wanted. She had loved him without condition or calculation, the way that certain kinds of love work, not because of what they return, but because of what they are. And she was angry. She was genuinely, deeply angry, in a way that had nothing to do with Mrs. Fraser's pearls or Courtney's seating chart or the business with the photos. She was angry because her son had been 30 feet away, and he had seen it, and he had stayed where he was. She was angry because money had apparently done what decency couldn't. She was angry because she had kept this secret for 2 years precisely so that people would show her who they were, and now she knew, and the knowing was not satisfying. "It was just sad," she said. "It shouldn't have taken any of this." He looked at the floor. "You saw what she did. You saw how your wife spoke to me. You saw your mother-in-law look at me like I was something she'd tracked in from outside. And you stood there, Elliot." She kept her voice level. "I need you to understand what that cost me. Not the money, not any of that. I need you to understand what it costs a person to stand in a room where she is not wanted and hold her head up and sit back down at table 11 and eat her bread and wait for her son to come over." He was crying now, quietly, in the way he had cried as a boy, without sound, just the wet shine of it. "I know," he said. "Mom, I know. Do you?" A long pause. "I think," he said carefully, That I have been making myself small for 2 years, making myself compatible, and I didn't even notice how far I'd gone. Miriam looked at him for a long time. That woman is your wife, she said finally. I'm not going to tell you what to do about that. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself. But I am going to tell you this. Whatever you decide, you need to be the person I raised. Not the person she wants. The person I raised. Courtney came to find them 20 minutes later. She had composed herself. She was very good at composing herself. This was one of the things Miriam had observed over 2 years, this particular competence. Courtney could reassemble her face into whatever expression was most useful in about 30 seconds flat. She said, "Miriam, I think we need to talk." Miriam said, "I agree. I want to apologize sincerely. I think tonight got away from me. I've been under so much pressure with the planning, and my mother she can push things. And I said things to you earlier that were, you told me I had no business being at my son's wedding," Miriam said. "Your mother said it. You stood there." Courtney's composure flickered, just slightly, just for a moment. "I know," she said. "That was wrong." "Yes," Miriam said. "It was." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Miriam said, "I'm not going to make a speech. I'm not going to make this a scene. But I want you to hear this, Courtney, and I want you to actually hear it, not just register it and file it away." She paused. "The version of me you thought you were managing tonight. The quiet woman from Scarborough. The one you put at table 11. The one your mother looked at, like she was in the wrong room. That is the real version of me. Everything else is just paperwork. And if you want to be part of this family, you need to learn how to treat the real version." Courtney was quiet for a long time. "Your company," she said finally. Not quite a question. "The infrastructure? The banks?" "Yes. How long have you?" "A long time," Miriam said. Another silence. "Why didn't you tell us?" Miriam looked at her. "I think you already know the answer to that." She left at 9:30. She took her clutch purse, and she said good night to the elderly great-uncle, who had woken up in time for dessert and turned out to be a very funny man who had spent 40 years as a veterinarian in New Brunswick. She said goodbye to Elliot at the door, holding his face in her hands the way she had not done since he was small. "Call me," she said. "I will," he said. "Mom, call me," she said again. "We'll talk." She took the elevator down to the lobby of the Fairmont and walked through the gilded revolving door onto Front Street. The June night was warm. The CN Tower was lit somewhere behind her. A streetcar went past on King, almost empty at this hour, its lights casting long yellows on the pavement. She walked to Union Station. She bought a large tea from the Tim Hortons inside. Double-double, the way she had drunk it since she was 22, and she sat on the plastic seat in the GO train waiting area, and she held the cup in both hands and let the warmth move into her palms. She thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts in Etobicoke and never once complained where Miriam could hear. She thought about the wobbling table and the borrowed earrings and the IBM terminal at the community center and Mr. Singh, who had shown up every Thursday afternoon for 3 years without anyone asking him to. She thought about the Halifax servers, which her team had stabilized within the hour, which was what her team did. She thought about Elliot's face when he crossed the room, the particular expression of a person beginning to understand something they should have understood sooner. The train announcement came over the PA. Delayed by 12 minutes, the familiar Canadian liturgy of winter-adjacent infrastructure. Miriam didn't mind. She had spent her whole life understanding that the important things took longer than they were supposed to, that the work was not glamorous, and the credit was rarely immediate, and the ground shifted under you regularly, and the only reliable thing, the only thing that had ever held, was the quality of what you built, and whether it could stand on its own. She thought it could. She took a sip of her tea. She thought, keep going. The train came in at 9:57, right on time after all, and Miriam Adibawale picked up her clutch purse and walked to the platform in her clearance rack dress, and she went home.